Espathra is a new Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet, and it's already one of my favorite Pokemon to use in competitive singles, despite not having great stats. Espathra is a match winner, and if you're not careful, it'll steal a game from even the most difficult positions. The reason is because of its hidden ability Speed Boost and Stored Power. That particular combination has never been seen before, and it means that every turn Espathra is on the field, it gets stronger and stronger. It's weak initially, and it can be vulnerable while starting out, but if you can figure out a way to hold on for a few turns, it can spiral out of control once its stored power becomes really strong. What makes Espathra a very good Pokemon, and not just a gimmick Pokemon, is Terastallization. Terastallization is a big part of why Espathra does well in competitive singles Pokemon. So let's go ahead and take a look at what exactly makes Espathra an A-grade Pokemon in competitive Generation 9. But first, this channel has seen a lot of growth in the past few days, so I just wanted to remind you to subscribe if you're not already. It's free and helps out the channel, and is a great idea if you want to stay updated with the latest in Generation 9 Pokemon. Also, as a thank you, I've decided to start putting teams I use in the description so that you can actually try out the Pokemon that I talk about. Espathra's movesets are basically built around Calm Mind and Stored Power. Each Calm Mind boosts your special attack itself, but also the base power of Stored Power. If you get enough power boost, then you can literally one-hit KO almost every Pokemon just through sheer power alone. Unfortunately, Psychic-type attacks and Pokemon get shut down by Dark-type Pokemon. Even a 400 base power Stored Power would do nothing versus a Dark-type Pokemon. So to get around Dark-type Pokemon, you'd have to use a coverage move like Dazzling Gleam. Unfortunately, Espathra isn't too great statistically. It's a solidly below average Pokemon in that regard. Its speed is good, but everything else is either average or below average, and its base stat total is a lot worse than the other top Pokemon. Even after a Calm Mind boost, Dazzling Gleam doesn't one-hit KO a lot of Dark-type Pokemon, and it's just a little too weak. A lot of Dark-type Pokemon can live a Dazzling Gleam and then one-hit KO them back with any physical Dark-type move. Other Dark types like Chi-Yu have a dual typing that helps them versus Fairy anyway. You would only be able to one-hit KO Pokemon like Roaring Moon, who has a 4 times weakness to Fairy. Even then, versus Dark-type Pokemon who would get one-hit KO'd by Dazzling Gleam, they could just Terastallize defensively. Roaring Moon often Terastallizes into a Flying-type Pokemon and would still maintain the Dark-type stab on its moves like Jaw Lock or Crunch. Espathra's Psychic-type attacks can be handled, and non-stab coverage moves are too weak to be game-breaking. But of course, we do live in the Terastallization era, and Espathra is one of the biggest beneficiaries of the mechanic. Espathra has 3 main Terastallization options. The first one is straightforward, Tera Fairy. By turning into a Fairy-type Pokemon, you gain a stab bonus on Dazzling Gleam, which lets you knock out Dark-type Pokemon. Getting a 1.5 times boost is really effective. Besides that, Fairy has natural defensive synergies with Psychic. Dark is not very effective on Fairy, and Ghost would become a neutral attack too. This helps Espathra take on Pokemon like Annihilate, Dragapult, or Xianpao. You can Terastallize as they attack you, Calm Mind, and all of a sudden you outspeed them next turn and can even one-hit KO them. Terastallization is also pretty helpful versus Sucker Punch, which is one of the strongest priority moves and would ordinarily be a good way to fight against Espathra's speed boosting capabilities. Fairy also has the additional benefit of making Espathra immune to Garchomp's Dragon Tail, which is a common way to make setup sweepers switch out. Tera Fairy still has issues with Pokemon like Chi-Yu, Kingambit, and Gholdengo. Kingambit and Gholdengo are both relatively bulky and have Steel-type moves. Gholdengo is less problematic because with enough Calm Mind boosts you can even beat that Pokemon too, but Kingambit is more threatening because it attacks off the physical side. Fairy is by far the most common Terastallization, but it's not the complete perfect typing. Certain Steel types are why Espathra has other common Terastallization options too. Tera Fighting with Tera Blast is another way to beat Dark-type Pokemon. Here, the advantage is that you can now hit Chi-Yu and Kingambit super effectively. Broadly, compared to Dazzling Gleam, Tera Fighting also hits Steel-type Pokemon. The downside is that Fighting is not as good as a defensive type as Fairy, and you don't have an immunity to Dragon Tail. The last main Terastallization option is Tera Fire. Tera Fire is mainly for Steel-type Pokemon who would resist a Psychic Fairy-type combination and do well versus the Fighting type. For example, Tera Fire would let you one-hit KO Pokemon like Scizor and Gholdengo. Overall though, Fairy and Fighting are preferred because they have better defensive outcomes. After Stored Power, Calm Mind, and a coverage move, your fourth move can really be anything. Protect is an option to stall a turn and gain even more speed and therefore more power. Roost is good for longevity, and Substitute can be used to protect against status conditions like Toxic. You could even use a move like Lumina Crash, its signature move, as a move with initial power that you can use in the early turn before stored power is ready. The EV spread can also really be anything from special attack to defense to speed. Generally, you don't need a lot of speed EVs because you're gonna get a speed boost anyway. After 2 speed boosts, you outspeed every natural Pokemon and Choice Scarf Pokemon with very minimal EV investment. Special attack is good for initial power, while HP and defense are better to cover your defense stat as you start Calm Minding up. Defense is the main vulnerability of Espathra. An uncommon option is to use an Electric Seed on Espathra and pair it with a Pokemon like Pink Urchin. This is perfectly good, but it's only usable on electric terrain teams. Espathra is also threatening to stall teams because a lot of stall teams rely on Unaware to beat setup Pokemon. However, Unaware only ignores stat changes and not base power changes. Eventually, stored power can reach enough base power to brute force through Unaware Pokemon. The main flaw with Espathra is that it needs help. It is too initially weak to get the job done. For the first turn it's in the game, its stored power is only 20 base power and it can't do anything. The next turn, after hopefully a Calm Mind and a speed boost, it's at 80 base power, which is respectable but far from being a match winner. Only after another boost does Espathra become really terrifying. No good player is just going to let you Calm Mind all over them without trying to stop you. Espathra doesn't have the defenses to work on its own and needs help from supporting Pokemon. Cyclizar is a very common Pokemon with its move Shed Tail. If it can Shed Tail a substitute to Espathra, that buys 1 turn for Espathra to start boosting. That 1 turn can be decisive and can be the turn that unlocks Espathra. Similarly, Reflect and Light Screen from a Pokemon like Grimmsnarl go a long way too. Espathra doesn't have great defenses on its own, but any Pokemon becomes tough to take down if damage is cut in half versus it. Reflect and Light Screen blunt attacking Pokemon and give Espathra a chance to start boosting up. It becomes especially threatening if Espathra has Roost too. Oftentimes, you're gonna see both of these strategies on the same team, and that makes Espathra especially deadly. You could even try other strategies like using Memento, or spreading status conditions like Burn with other Pokemon early game, as a way to help Espathra set up versus physical attackers in the late game. Find a way to create a situation where Espathra can boost and stay alive for more than a turn or two, and it'll win you a lot of games. It requires a little effort, but the reward you get from that effort is massive. You get one of the most threatening match-winning Pokemon in competitive Generation 9 singles Pokemon.